Do you ever find yourself tossing and turning at night, wondering why the hell you can't fall asleep or stay asleep? What if the real reason for your sleep struggles aren't actually your thoughts, but it's the way that you're breathing? In today's episode, I'm joined by Dr. Barry Krakow, a leading sleep medicine specialist who will uncover the truth about insomnia and how improper breathing impacts the quality of your sleep. You're going to learn practical strategies to improve your breathing, train yourself to nasal breathe, and understand why some sleep medications might not be the solution that you're looking for. By the end of this episode, you're going to have the tools that you need to wake up feeling more rested and refreshed than ever before. Before we dive in though, if you're listening on the Apple Podcast app or on Spotify, make sure you hit that follow button so you get notified when more educational, insightful, and motivational episodes come out. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit like and subscribe down below. All right, what's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Best You podcast. Today, I am very excited to be joined by the one and only Dr. Barry Krakow, and today we're going to talk all about sleep. And oftentimes when we talk about sleep, we sometimes just talk about it from a physical health perspective. We sometimes just talk about how it helps to improve our performance, how it improves our energy levels, maybe our memory, how it's important for living longer, and we'll probably brush on some of that stuff today, but we're also going to be talking about sleep from the mental health side of things. Dr. Barry has written a book called Life-Saving Sleep, New Horizons in Mental Health Treatment, and he's on the cutting edge of the practices and techniques to help psychiatrists start to actually implement this into their practices with their patients and whatnot. So I want you talk about how sleep physiology is actually more important than sleep psychology. You know, a lot of people think that they are potentially having sleep issues because they might have mental health problems, but you kind of talk about how it could be sometimes the other way around. So what do you kind of mean by sleep physiology is more important than sleep psychology?
Well, Nick, that's a great intro, and I really appreciate you having me on the program because so many people, as we all know, who are involved in fitness and wellness, recognize the importance of sleep. And yet many of the people that we're trying to help don't understand specifically that what we're dealing with is sleep means brain. So sleep means brain health. And that means when you talk about physiology, if you're not getting good sleep, and this is the climax of the show, you're getting brain damage. And people just don't get that. They don't want to hear it. They can't imagine. You probably know from your own experiences how many people disrespect sleep, how many people have a badge of honor that they can get by on this amount of sleep or drink this amount of Red Bull, whichever way it works out. But the bottom line is, and the more people begin to get this understanding, more likely they're going to get involved in, well, maybe I should do something about my sleep. It's brain damage, period, end of sentence. If your sleep is not where it's supposed to be, you are literally damaging your brain, which means if you're trying to do exercise and then you're saying, well, why aren't I recovering as well as I should be? That's because your nervous system, your brain, is not operating the way it's supposed to help you recover. So that's sort of a bold starting point, and we can get into it, but it's very important for people to understand that sleep is a very big deal.
Yeah, no, I love it. That's a great place to start. And luckily, I think that at least in the circles that I swim in, people are becoming more and more attuned to that, because I know I personally used to be the type of person. Luckily, it's probably 6 or 7 years now in the rearview mirror where I would wear it as a badge of honor of how I can operate on very little sleep and still be productive. And then I had a time where I was tailgating for a football game and we were on a boat and I fell asleep on the boat for about an hour and a half because I was so darn tired and I missed out on a lot of the fun. And I was like, I got to start taking this thing a little bit more seriously. So it's definitely important to start with that message to remind people that it's not just this nice to have thing. It really is brain damage. And so I'm gonna take this a few different places, but I want to start with a couple of popular things that I see in conversations with people around sleep. You know, some people tend to fall asleep, and I'm luckily one of this person. I tend to fall asleep in a matter of minutes. When I'm tired and my head hits the pillow, I can be gone in 2 minutes. If it takes me longer than 15 minutes to fall asleep, I'm like, this is weird. But some people take at least 30 to 60 minutes almost every single night to fall asleep. And so some people, it's like really quick. Some people it takes a little bit longer. How much of that is genetic, if at all? And how much of falling asleep quickly can be influenced by maybe our habits, maybe our mindset, or maybe some of like physiological practices that we can start to implement?
Right. So I've been working on insomnia research for decades. And as it so happens, one of the major discoveries I had with this had to do with my own insomnia. And this is a TEDx talk that I did about 7 years ago. And it was the story of how I was working with a group of sleep doctors. I happened to be at a journal club. We were talking about a bunch of things, and I was complaining to a bunch of sleep doctors and sleep dentists about some of my insomnia. And this one dentist turned to me, he's no longer alive, Dr. Thomas Mead. He was a pioneer in the field of sleep medicine. He invented one of the first dental devices that was ever used back in the 1980s for the treatment of sleep disordered breathing. And I've been struggling with some insomnia, not so severe, but enough to annoy me and to interfere a little bit with my work in the mid 1990s. And he heard me talking about this. We were good friends from a long time. And he said, Barry, come over here. So he took me into the kitchen of this center where we were. They had a microwave. He takes out this piece of plastic. He throws it into a cup of water, puts it in the microwave and boils it, takes it out and says, here, put this in your mouth. So I put it in my mouth and I get for him, my dental arches. He takes it out. He starts shaving it around. He says, put it back in. He says, comfortable. And I said, well, he takes it again, shaves it a little bit. Fine. He says, okay, here, you sleep with this tonight. You tell me what happens. Now, the backstory is that he knew that I had been to the world's leading sleep center just a couple years before that, Stanford University. I trained with Dr. Christian Guilleminault briefly. He was the all-time greatest sleep researcher until he passed 5 years ago. He's so prominent that he passed 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and he's still publishing papers. They still have
Wow.
his name on publications up to this day. So that's how prominent he was. Anyway, Dr. Guilleminault had said to me, I think you've got, one of these breathing conditions. I think you need to evaluate it. Anyway, bottom line, put the dental device in. And that night, for the first time in 2 years, I slept all through the night. And I woke up and I looked at my wife and said, Jessica, what happened last night? Like I don't get this. Like I've been waking up every night to either pee or wake up and toss and turn, whatever. I put that dental device in and all through the night. So I said, well, wait a second. If this breathing condition was causing me to wake up during the night, why did I think that was psychological? And so I learned over the years, particularly after this little quote unquote personal experiment, that most insomnia is based on both concepts, the psychological and the physiological. The physiological is there's a breathing disturbance in most people with chronic insomnia, for sure. I mean, if you have chronic insomnia and you've tried sleeping pills, if like you just tell me those two things, your chances of having a sleep breathing condition is greater than 90%. That's how common it is. The second part is much more intricate, in some ways, much more involved, complex, and hard to treat, but it has to do with the mindset where we talk about the concept of emotional closure. So somebody who's had a really good day and they're finished with their day and they're looking forward to tomorrow, but they're not worried about tomorrow, that person gets into bed and does what? They go to sleep. But somebody who is fretting, frustrated, anxious, angry about what happened today, and now is even worried about tomorrow, that person doesn't have emotional closure. And so that person is also going to have insomnia. Now, the interesting interplay and this is wild. So I just want to throw this one more thing out to you. The average insomniac will say one thing in particular, say, well, why can't you sleep? And they go, well, I can't turn off my mind. I have racing thoughts. And what we've learned over the years is there are many who do need to have either psychotherapy or cognitive behavioral therapy, various things to help them learn about emotional closure. But the shock to us, and it happened to me as well, was when you treat a breathing disorder, it actually decreases the racing thoughts you have at bedtime, which
Mm.
led us to an interesting theory that because breathing is so primal, what could be more primal than breathing? That if you threaten yourself because you know that you're going to not breathe well at night, what's the easiest way not to choke and suffocate and have breathing disturbances? It's easy. Don't go to sleep. So
Mm.
racing thoughts actually helps you stay awake as a defense mechanism to prevent you
Wow.
from sleeping and then choking. And we heard this from so many patients. This was crazy. Back in the 2000s, when we opened up our own sleep center, we said, okay, well, great. We're going to be a multi-system, multi-service sleep center. We're going to do nightmare treatment, insomnia treatments, sleep apnea treatment. And it just stunned us that so many people with insomnia would come in and we go, okay, well, let me just test you first. We're going to do some other, therapies, psychological therapies, but let me test you first. Almost all of them have a breathing condition. Almost all of them said, well, gosh, if there's something physical in play here, I'd like to treat the physical. Who wants to be stigmatized with some mental condition when you can be told, well, it's your thyroid or it's diabetes or it's sleep disordered breathing? We had so many people come back and tell us, doctor, I'm using my PAP machine or my dental device. What happened to my racing thoughts? I used to have racing thoughts at bedtime. They're gone. Can you explain that? We said, yeah, we think this is the explanation.
Wow, that is absolutely nuts. That how the body works that way. Just to re-clarify and succinctly say what he just said is, like you laid it out beautifully. Insomnia is both psychological and physiological, has both parts to it. Psychological, to make it as simple as possible, oversimplification. Psychological is oftentimes like emotional closure that people need, and physiological is a breathing condition. And oftentimes it's the breathing condition that people have that causes their brain to have racing thoughts to prevent them from going to bed so that they don't die from their breathing condition. That is absolutely insane. That is crazy. Okay, so we're talking about this breathing condition. What is the breathing condition that people typically have that prevents them from falling asleep and or staying?
Right. So sleep disordered breathing is the umbrella term that I like to use. Everybody uses terms like obstructive sleep apnea, which sounds a little bit scary because obviously you stop breathing when you have an apnea. Apnea means stop breathing. But what I want to get across is any minor degree of sleep breathing disturbance is enough to cause insomnia. If
Right.
you put your hands on your throat and you choke yourself 10% or 25%, you don't say, oh, well, that's comfortable. I could tolerate it. No, you go, I don't like that. I don't like anything to interfere with my breathing. So in sleep disordered breathing, I have these categorizations called apneas, hypopneas. There's also something we call the third breathing event. The third breathing event is much more subtle. It's only like a 10 to 25%, quote, only 10 to 25% drop off in airflow. And apnea means you actually stop breathing. Hypopnea means you lost 50% of your airflow. And in the case of this third breathing event, you end up with this smaller amount of volume of air lost. But the bottom line is on all three of them, your brain says, no way, I'm not going to stand for this. So what does the brain do? It arouses or awakens you. And so a lot of people get so confused about sleep disordered breathing because of the name. Sounds like it, oh, well, this must be all about oxygen. Well, no, the average insomnia patient who has this problem has almost perfectly normal oxygen. There's nothing about the oxygen that's absolutely dangerous. There are what are called oxygen fluctuations And those are not good, by the way, and they may even cause brain damage, but they're not serious life-threatening, like in cases of severe sleep apnea, where you're stopping breathing for 60 seconds and your oxygen is dropping into a place where you're going to have a cardiac arrhythmia and kick the bucket. So that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the fact that so many people with insomnia have these hypopneas and these third breathing events, and their problem is the brain fragmentation. Sleep fragmentation is the brain damage that we talked about at the outset. And so that's how they have that problem. And the sleep fragmentation means that all of the sleep stages you're supposed to go into and stay in don't happen. Like if you're supposed to go into your deep delta stage 3 non-REM sleep for the first few hours of the night and get really consolidated sleep, release growth hormone during that time, none of that's going to happen because your breathing may get disrupted. And then near the second half of the night, when you're supposed to go into your rapid eye movement sleep, which is going to help you learn to process emotions, memories, learning, all that stuff having to do with REM sleep. Again, it's going to be broken up because of these breathing events. So yes, it's a breathing disorder, but the problem is it's just messing with your brain all night long.
Yeah. Are during these sleep fragmentations and these third breathing events, if you will, are people usually waking up, consciously waking up to these things, or is it just their brain being aroused, therefore they're not falling into the stage of sleep that they should be falling into?
So rarely waking up in terms of percentages. Most
Okay.
people who have this problem are having some kind of arousal between 100 and 500 times a night. But they may awaken 3 times, or they may
Yeah.
awaken 5 times. And we always used to kid them, in the sleep center. We say, "Oh, you wake 5 times? Okay, well, add a zero to that. What do you get? You're saying I get up 50 times? Yeah. Now add another zero. I go, 500 times you're telling me my brain is trying to wake up? Yeah, because it wants to make sure you're breathing better."
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
that's
crazy.
crazy.
That's
That's
crazy.
crazy.
I'm
I'm
curious,
curious,
have
have
these has
has
sleep
sleep
disordered
disordered
breathing
breathing
become
become
more
more
popular
popular
over the last few decades, or is it something that's we've always just dealt with and maybe it's just now becoming more popular?
By popular, I think you mean more well known, because
Right, correct.
obviously, the prevalence of it is very, very confusing. Everybody believes that there's a whole bunch of nutritional factors, environmental factors, and I'm not disputing that. I think there's probably something going on that's made us much more susceptible to this problem. But sleep medicine as a formal field where you have sleep centers only came into existence 45 years ago. So yes, there is an absolute impact on the prevalence just because now we know we've got doctors who can diagnose this. Nonetheless, something has changed and people probably have this condition more. We know, for example, if you have obesity, you have a tremendous risk for having sleep disordered breathing because the obesity causes the fat tissues around your tongue to expand, and then you end up having sleep apnea. But there's all kinds of people that are not overweight that
Right.
also have sleep apnea.
Right. So we've talked about the condition. Now let's talk a little bit about what people can actually do. You talk about kind of different levels of treatment in your book a little bit. You talk about nasal spray, nasal strips, PAP machines. So I guess to even back up one more time is the sleep breathing condition that most people have is that they need to be breathing more nasally. Is that correct?
Well, for sure, because we need to be breathing more nasally just in general. I mean,
Right,
that's the way
yes.
right. And so what happens is with sleep disordered breathing, there is an inflammation that goes on in the tissues, starting from the nose all the way down to the bottom of the throat, so that it's extraordinarily common that most people with sleep disordered breathing have nasal problems just
Mhm.
from the get-go. Like either that actually helped them, not help them, hurt them and led them down that path, or the sleep disordered breathing worsened it. So in my career, when I meet somebody with sleep disordered breathing, the first thing I ask is, tell me about your nasal breathing. Like, do you Do you have congestion when you go to bed at night? Do you have congestion when you wake up in the morning? And the answer is in the affirmative for a large number of people. And they go, well, what do you do about that? And so they're thinking, well, that's just me. That's just who I am. I said, no, that's not a zero tolerance policy. You have to recognize that if your nasal breathing is messed up because of runny nose, stuffy nose, congested nose, then you have to do something about that. Otherwise, it's going to be very self-defeating to try to use some other treatment that's more advanced. If you try to use a PAP machine and you have chronic congestion, you can actually give yourself a chronic sinus problem.
Mm.
So why would you do that? You wouldn't. You would say, no, let me start with my nose. That's what we focused on the last several years, getting people to work on their nose to get nasal breathing in really good shape. And a lot of people have trouble with that because they normalize their breathing. They just said, this is the way I am. Why would I think something should be different?
Right. So, do you help to train people with their nasal breathing by when they're awake first and get them trained to be more naturally nasal breathing when they're awake? Therefore, when they're sleeping, they're more naturally able to do that. And if so, do you use things like taping their mouth, the nasal strips, or what all do you use?
Certainly, it's certainly step by step. And the very first thing is I say, go into the shower, get a great shower, get some steam in the shower, clean out the boogies, all the snot, get it out, step out of the shower and take a deep breath through your nose and remember that breath because that's the breath you need 24 hours a day, sleeping and waking. And
Mm.
people do that and they go, gosh, I don't think I have that. So I said, all right, well, most people don't. And so that means you've got to evaluate. Is it, by the way, on my website, barrycrakomd.com, there's a free video series. It's a 1 hour series on nasal breathing. It's called the Nose, 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 Knows. And in that, I walk people through what's called allergic and non-allergic rhinitis, which are the two most common reasons why people have trouble breathing through their nose. But just to give you a quick sample of it, we learned years ago that some of these individuals who come in and they're getting diagnosed and they're like, oh, well, I can't use CPAP. I mean, you know, that kind of thing. You say, all right, we want you to take a bottle of nasal saline and we want you to squirt it in your nose several times a day. It can be 3 times a day, it can be 10 times a day. Just keep cleaning out your nose for a couple of weeks. And they'd come back to us in 2 weeks and say, this is crazy, but I'm sleeping better. How can that be? They say, well, that's how important your nose is. And of course, that's a great sales job because if you did that and now you're sleeping better, you're going to say, gee, so maybe I really do have one of these sleep breathing conditions. Some of the people say, well, is that all I need, nasal saline? And some people will go that direction, like, oh, I'm not doing anything else. But then you keep adding in, you add nasal strips or nasal dilators, or you talk about, position, in the bed, or you talk about cooler temperature in the bedroom because that can help with breathing. Nonetheless, over time, many people do need either a professional oral appliance, it's called, for the dental device, or they need PAP therapy. And we found tremendous success in 2005 by stopping prescribing CPAP because CPAP is continuous pressure. It's very uncomfortable. And we switched over to bi-level devices, which means a higher pressure when you breathe in, a lower pressure when you breathe out, much more natural, organic to the way you breathe. And most people adapted to it much faster, much better, absolutely loved it compared to CPAP. So we stuck with that ever since 2005 and had tremendous success with these patients, particularly, as you know, from my book and my career. Most of my patient cohorts have had mental health disorders, which means they have a terrible time trying to adapt to PAP therapy. So we
Mm.
had to create all these paradigms for them to help them get to that place so they could adapt. And one of the key adaptive points was switching from CPAP to bi-level modes. And we started that in 2005 and did that for 15 straight years with great success.
Wow. A lot of people, if they have a sleep condition, or they're struggling to fall asleep or struggling to stay asleep, oftentimes they might go to some sort of sleeping pill. They might go to melatonin. They might start taking magnesium, is really popular now. And I know one of the things that you talk about is it's not just about the quantity of sleep that you get, but it's the quality of sleep that you get. And, sometimes those are probably going to be relatively proportional, but sometimes not. And it sounds like to me that a lot of these things that people are using are maybe hopefully improving the quantity of their sleep. And so they think that they're getting the benefit they need to get, but they might still be having these sleep fragmentations throughout the night. So their quality of sleep is still disturbed and they're not hitting the delta sleep and the REM sleep that they should be. Therefore, they're still experiencing brain damage. Is that kind of what you're seeing when people are going to do these other remedies? They're just getting potentially maybe quantity of sleep but not quality?
So you hit the nail on the head. If you went to the average person on the street and said, tell me about the quality of your sleep, you just said that was your question, like 80% of them will go, I sleep 7 hours a night.
Yeah.
I go, wait a second. I didn't ask you about numbers. I said, so people don't know how to think about quality. So that's the first problem. The second problem is that, as you said, if they keep sleeping longer, they're going to go, well, it must be better. The truth of the matter is, some of these supplements, even some sleeping pills, may improve sleep quality for some people, but it's absolutely trial and error. It's not something like, oh, the scientific evidence shows this or that. A study just came out this week, which is absolutely amazing, and which most of us who've been in the field knew was going to come out sooner or later, showing that Ambien can actually be linked to causing brain damage.
Wow.
And the way Ambien would cause brain damage is because it interferes with you getting deep sleep. And this is the part that's so crazy about this. Deep sleep is when your brain has to go through its own self-cleaning mechanism. We like to call it a really healthy brainwashing system. It's called the glymphatic system. It was only discovered about 12 years ago. The researchers who discovered it just published a paper this week showing that Ambien is interfering with the way that system works and the way it actually pulsates in a certain way to produce more flow to get more waste products out of the brain. And so you have to ask the question, will Ambien now get a black box warning that says use of this drug may be a risk for dementia, which was what they hypothesized in this paper. Now, all these different supplements don't all do the same things, but it is trial and error in the following way. If you can use a supplement and you can wake up and you can say, I was dreaming more, I felt better when I woke up in the morning, I had better energy during the day, the chances that that impacted your sleep quality are very high. But if you can't say those things, if all you can say is, I slept through the night, and that's all I wanted, because that's a big deal. Psychologically, it's a huge thing to sleep through the night. Tremendous psychological respite from all the, cares and worries of the day. But if that's all you got, then you want to reevaluate the use of your supplements or your sleeping pills, because you're supposed to be improving the quality of your sleep so that you feel better during the day. And in terms of mental health, your sleep is supposed to improve your anxiety. Your sleep is supposed to improve your depression and PTSD. And your sleep is supposed to improve your memory, concentration, and attention. If your sleep is not doing that, that immediately raises the question about, well, what is your sleep doing?
Right. There's that's great. I think that's a very good set of questions that people can look through or ask themselves as to is what I'm doing actually benefiting the quality of my sleep? Like, obviously there's the psychological benefit of sleeping through the night, and that's huge, the psychological benefit that you're looking for, but then the physical benefit of having more energy, and then also the lens of like, am I dreaming? So therefore, am I getting into REM sleep? And so those are like, those last two are really good predictors or evidence that you are hitting the stages of sleep that you should be hitting. And so that's a really good lens for people to run themselves through.
Let me give you one more that's so apt for your audience. And most people, I'm guessing, have not heard this relationship. And there's not a lot of research on it, but I'm persuaded by it personally and also anecdotally from hearing other people. And that is exercise recovery.
Mm.
That if you are noticing that your recovery from exercise is not where you think it should be, or your trainer is telling you it should be, or your doctor is telling you, or what you've read about, your chances of having poor sleep quality or something wrong with your sleep are astronomical. There is such a relationship between good quality sleep and the ability to recover from running, golfing, basketball, swimming, walking, whatever it happens to be. I remember before I treated my sleep disorder, I tried to play a round of golf, and I used to be able to play a round of golf every day if I wanted to. But there was a time when, even in my 40s, I began to say, "Yeah, I don't. I played yesterday. I don't think I could play today. I'm just kind of worn out." And as soon as I got my treatment for my sleep disorder, if I wanted to play golf a second day in a row, I could, no sweat. I think other people really who are into fitness pay critical attention to the recovery period, and sleep is a great area to investigate if you are getting suspicious about the way your recovery is going.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. There's a few other things that I want to cover here real quick. The first of which I want to cover the effects that maybe, because you cover it in the book, the effects that some anti-anxiety and antidepressant pills have on sleep. Then we're going to get into some of the wearable technology and sleep, just quickly on these items, so respectful of time, and then also like posture when you sleep. But let's start with the anti-anxiety and antidepressant pills. I know you talk in your book about some of the potentially downsides that those pills have with regards to the quality of your sleep. So riff on that a little bit.
Right. The short answer is that the field of psychiatry and psychology really doesn't understand the relationship of sleep and mental health. They just don't understand it. So they're willing to prescribe these drugs with good intentions to help somebody with anxiety, to help somebody with depression. What they don't understand, and which they don't pay attention to from a sleep angle, because they're not trained to, is that they are now interfering with somebody's sleep architecture. They're interfering with REM sleep. They're interfering with delta sleep. And this is a big issue that is not going to get fixed overnight. It's going to require another decade of some kind of intersection between sleep and psychiatry and so forth to evaluate all of these drugs. But people do have to be asking themselves the question, well, wait a second, I do want to treat my anxiety. I do want to treat my depression. My doctor told me to take this pill, and I'm not sitting here telling you don't take your pills, but you're going to have to figure this out. It's a much more involved process, and it's a mistake to just stick with those drugs for the rest of your life, in my opinion. It's much more important to ask the question, is my sleep part of my mental health problem? And let's work together with a sleep doctor and a psychiatrist so they can help me. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen. Sleep doctors and psychiatrists are not working together. Sleep doctors and therapists and psychologists are not working together. This is a huge gap in healthcare, and I honestly don't know how it's going to be transcended.
Yeah. Well, isn't that what one of the things you're doing right now is helping to train psychiatrists, right? In sleep medicine and whatnot?
That's one psychiatry residency training program.
Yeah. Of course.
So one at a time.
Let's go, baby. One at a time. One at a time. I love it. Let's get into the are you a fan of any of the wearable technology that tracks sleep?
Absolutely.
I know that
Absolutely.
I've got just a Garmin watch that I originally, its main role is a fitness tracker, but I got to say, it seems to be pretty darn accurate with regards to tracking my sleep when I'm waking up. Any days or nights that I have alcohol the day before, that night I can definitely tell on my watch or whatnot. Is there a particular wearable technology that you like the best?
There is not. I just kind of keep my ears open to hear more about which ones may be giving more reliability about non-REM sleep versus REM sleep, light sleep versus deep sleep, something that may give breathing patterns. More and more of this stuff is coming on board. And this is great because I'm a strong proponent of the free market entrepreneurial approach to healthcare that's now coming down the pike. And the fields of medicine, whether it's sleep medicine, psychiatry, whatever, regular medicine isn't keeping up. And in sleep medicine in particular, they're not keeping up. And there's not any way where they can handle the number of people that are going to have these sleep problems that have to be treated. So the wearables are a great way to start. And I've actually treated people where they do a wearable and I say, oh, that's very interesting. Why don't you wear a nasal strip for a week and tell me what data you see? And they come back and say, wow, the data changed just with the nasal strip. Again,
Yeah.
you're getting these buy-ins. So that's why I love the wearables because it's educating people. They're now beginning to actually think physiologically about their sleep.
Yeah, and that feedback loop is so motivating to do certain behaviors or not do certain behaviors. Like this has definitely been made me think a couple of times before having that extra drink of alcohol or any alcohol at all before certain nights going to bed. Last thing I want to just ask you is around sleep posture. Some people like sleeping on their back, their stomach, their side. From a breathing standpoint, is there a most beneficial way to sleep?
So the breathing issue and the other issues about sleep and posture are very important, very interesting, because you absolutely can have an impact that will make a difference for you. Long term, though, I mean, we don't know whether certain positions are problematic. I was reading recently somebody making a bizarre claim how sleeping on your stomach is bad because somehow it interferes with blood flow into your brain. And I mean, I was trying to find the research, I couldn't find it, what this person was quoting, but millions of people sleep on their stomach.
Yeah.
And they do so because they're preventing themselves from sleeping on their back. When you sleep on your back, you're absolutely at greater risk for having sleep disordered breathing. Many CPAP patients will sleep on their stomach. And so obviously they're getting good airflow because the CPAP is helping them. Or we like to call it PAP, not CPAP anymore. Um, but there's also a lot of evidence to suggest, I shouldn't say evidence, there's a lot of history over the years of people talking about side sleeping being very good for health. I don't know how much evidence there are for these things, but I do think it's important for a person to experiment,
Right.
particularly pain patients, because if they've got pain and soreness, you can't tell them, oh, go sleep this way. They might say, well, I've got to be in this position. So my response to that then is if you have pain, you really do need to evaluate your sleep quality and discover what else might help your sleep so you can retain that position if that's what you want.
Mm. Well, this has been great, Barry. I think that hopefully a lot of people have had a paradigm shift from listening to this episode when it comes to their sleep issues, because I know that anytime a lot of the clients that I work with struggle to fall asleep, struggle to stay asleep, they think it's because they can't turn their brain off. They think it's because they can't shut off the worries from the day or the worries for tomorrow. And, maybe that's because their body's just trying to save them from, quote, dying because of their sleep disordered breathing and their sleep fragmentations and whatnot. And so if we can all just take a moment to slow down and focus on our breathing and work on improving our nasal breathing and step in a hot shower, clear everything out, step out, take a deep breath through our nose and realize that's actually how we should be breathing on a regular basis all throughout the day for 24 hours, then that I think would do us a whole lot of good. And I love how you finished the episode started the episode. I want to end the episode like that, like sleep equals brain health and poor sleep equals brain damage. I think that's such a great reminder to hammer home at the end of this. And you guys need to make sure you go look at his nasal breathing video course that he said he has on his website. He says it's at barrycrakowmd.com. Again, barrycrakowmd.com. I'll have that in the show notes. It's called Nose, I guess, NOSEKNOWS. So you should definitely go check that out as well. And you should check out his book, Life-Saving Sleep, New Horizons in Mental Health Treatment. We'll have that linked up in the show notes as well. Barry, is there any other good place that people should go?
Yeah, I've got a free Substack newsletter called fastasleep.substack.com. I have a new book, Fast Asleep, that's also coming out in a couple months, which is a little bit more about the psychological aspects of insomnia.
Fast Asleep. All right. That's awesome. That's awesome. Congrats on the new book coming out. That's great. Well, good deal. This has been great. Again, a huge paradigm shift, hopefully, for a lot of people. I know I didn't view sleep this way before doing the research for this podcast. So that was huge for me, and hopefully being able to coach and enlighten some of my clients. Not that I'm a sleep medicine doctor or anything like that, but this stuff is great, and I know that you should be nasal breathing regardless. So Barry, thank you so much for hopping on today. I know a lot of people got a lot of value. You guys make sure you follow the podcast on the Apple Podcast app and on Spotify if you don't already. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button down below. Go check out his video course on nasal breathing. Check out his book and his upcoming book. And other than that, that's all we got, Barry. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Wow, what an incredible conversation with Dr. Barry. I know that was a big paradigm shift for me in how I am going to go about looking at sleep and how I'm going to go about helping my clients with improving their sleep, because his insights to how nasal breathing and breathing in general directly affects sleep quality, I know are going to be way different than a lot of people had ever thought about it before. And he gave some great practical steps for how we can improve our sleep starting today. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow The Best You Podcast on the Apple Podcast app and on Spotify. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button down below. But before we leave today, here are my 3 biggest takeaways from the episode. Number 1, breathing really is the key to better sleep. You know, it was important to distinguish that, yes, sleep is both psychological and physiological, and for different people, it's going to be various percentages of what's psychological and what's physiological. But I thought that one point that he brought up is so key, that sometimes the physiological of poor breathing mechanics will cause your brain to cause you to have more racing thoughts all the time, so that it can keep you awake, because it doesn't want you to fall asleep and die because you cannot be breathing correctly. And so sometimes if you actually improve the physiological first, it will help to resolve the psychological as a byproduct. The second big takeaway is sometimes you might want to be rethinking your sleep medications and potentially your anti-anxiety and antidepressant medications. Now, again, I am not that doctor. You need to make sure you go see your medical professional before adding in any kind of medications or taking away any kind of medications. But Dr. Barry brought up some interesting thoughts, at least, as to how sometimes these medications do inhibit the quality of our sleep. And then third and finally, the importance of understanding your body. You know, he gave them various different lenses to look through with regards to how good is the quality of our sleep. He talked about, are we waking up actually feeling more energetic? Are we able to recover from our exercise? Are we dreaming regularly? Because all of those things can be signs of high quality sleep. If we're not recovering well from our exercise, if we're not dreaming, if we're not waking up rested, then the quality of our sleep is probably pretty poor. And so we need to aim to make the adjustments necessary to improve it. Sleep is absolutely critical. I love what he said. I'm going to say it again, that sleep equals brain health. Poor sleep equals brain damage. And that's something that I need to continually remind myself, so that I continually prioritize my sleep, because sleep is one of the biggest things that you can do in order to continue to get closer to the healthiest version of yourself, and ultimately for you to continue to get closer and closer to your best you.